Back in 2012, before Nicola Willis was even on the board of directors, Atlas Network member group the New Zealand Initiative started pushing for something that they called localism. They say it was meant to be about empowering communities to make decisions about their own development, to put local people in charge and to give their councils financial incentives to grow. They were really excited when they got a poll in 2023 from another Atlas Network member, the Taxpayers Union, that said 70% of people supported localist revenue sharing, 74% of National Party members supported it, 80% of ACT Party voters supported it. They declared localism had become a mainstream idea, and it was one that was clearly adopted by Christopher Luxon and National, who pushed it out quite a bit and used it as a please don't think we're racist because we're dog whistling to racists about Three Waters alternative angle towards local government. Since then, though, the coalition has actually worked to take away local decision-making. It's worked to remove locals being in charge of their own areas, and it's all but ignored any kind of changing funding model, with the exception of a grant system announced in the budget last week that benefits high-growth areas and leaves low-growth areas out in limbo. And on Tuesday, they announced the next step to continue stripping away local voices in the decision-making process by stripping non-elected committee members from having voting rights at council committees. Now, a council committee is an advisory group. The actual council is the one who makes the final decisions, and those committees sometimes bring in outside expertise and perspectives. For most councils, this includes independent auditors for financial decisions and the voices of local iwi. In a place like Kirikiriroa Hamilton, for example, they use a model called Māngai Māori. On some committees, they have iwi and mata waka appointed representatives who are also qualified in the area the committee covers to bring in a qualified Indigenous perspective to the decision-making process. And those committee decisions are then voted on by the elected members. Hamilton City Council sees this as a way that they can ensure partnership, participation and protection. The treaty principles for all parties under Te Tiriti, while final say still rests with those elected, ensuring the democratic process is upheld. And this was actually reconfirmed in February, with the only dissenters being the ACT member deputy mayor and 3 members of conspiracy-aligned Hamilton group Better Hamilton. The supporters, which include former National Party MP and current Hamilton Mayor Tim McIndoe, they say that especially at a time when councils are being forced to rush changes through, like water reform and amalgamation plans, the voices of specialised Māori expertise are needed more than ever. And that model is just one of a number of models around the country, because localism means letting locals decide which model works best for them, right? But this decision is just the latest in a long list of decisions from the coalition to strip local voices and stop local decisions. As a result, by the end of next election cycle for local government, we're going to have the least number of elected representatives we've ever had across the country. So what exactly does letting you make local decisions locally really look like then? Well, for this government, it actually started off by throwing out the local government reformation report that the last government commissioned from highly qualified experts because, as local government minister at the time, Simeon Brown said, it was woke. It included the forced referendums of Māori wards on councils, which more people voted to retain nationally than disband. It included forcing speed limit increases around schools and urban streets, despite expert advice that it was dangerous, going to lead to more deaths, and it ignored local advocacy groups asking for it not to happen. They overturned spatial planning frameworks that dissolved regional planning committees, which included local government, iwi and central government, all collabing on regional development plans. They are imposing an unworkable rates cap set at CPI. Not a single council that's amended their long-term plans since the election last year has actually been able to reduce the costs to within that band, meaning the government is forcing the reduction of services and maintenance infrastructure for growing population bases around local government. There's their cancellation of Three Waters and putting in place local water done well, which experts have said is going to cost billions more, and in some places like Selwyn is going to land their constituents a nearly 30% bill increase, because, racism is expensive. They also remove statutory objectives for those water entities to avoid adverse effects on the environment, replacing it to focus on urban growth. And I'm not sure what could possibly go wrong by not putting any kind of focus on environmental outcomes. There's been the Fast Track Approvals Bill, which allows 3 MPs to bypass local council district plans or resource management consenting pathways, stripping the ability for local communities to have their say. They changed the land use planning assumptions that weaken local councils' ability to restrict zoning based on neighbourhood character, urban design, or community scale planning. Councils are being forced to change district plans to enable immediate expansion in housing, which forces more expenditure on infrastructure that was covered by developers. They've removed the oversight on building inspections and planning restrictions for granny flats, changed laws to force councils to compensate landowners for regulatory takings if councils make tougher than national standards the norm in their planning, and they told all councils that they have just 3 months to come up with plans to reorganise massive regional organisations to strengthen and simplify local government, which means that councils can't even undertake proper community consultation processes before the process is locked in. It's a lot of removing local from local government, and some of it is clearly based on racist dog whistles and placating racists. This latest announcement is actually one of them, because the right-wing central government did not like the way Northland voters chose their representation and how their voices were heard, and one ACT councillor got all upset about it, because she's in the minority and doesn't like being treated the way she clearly wants to treat other minorities. And for many, the rate of change, how much of it's been pushed under urgency and how much it takes away from local decision-making and silence local voices, particularly local Māori voices, is a real concern. For organisations like the New Zealand Initiative, whose own submission on simplifying local government earlier this year said they have concerns with the core architecture of rushed changes that require substantial centralisation and a weakening of direct democratic accountability at a regional level, and that's why they opposed it. The fact is, though, astroturfs and lobby groups shouldn't be the ones shaping local government reform, even when claiming it's to give locals more local voices. It needs to be driven locally to make sure the needs of our communities are the most prominent in the decision-making process. That is, if they're even allowed to make their own decisions in the coming days. Hello there, kia ora podcast listeners. Hey, this was a really interesting one for me because people kept sending me messages all afternoon yesterday going, local government, oh my God, local government reform. And this is, for me, really fascinating for a number of reasons. I'm a big fan of local government. I've been totally involved with it for a long time. I want to say 30 years, almost 30 years. Jesus. And in that time, it showed me that things move very slowly, but democracy is clearly very important at every level. And sure, I don't necessarily agree with the way that everybody votes. Nobody ever does. But it's really important that people get out there and have their say. And the thing that has always annoyed me the most about local government is the low turnout, the low voter turnout. And I get it. It feels boring. It feels pointless. But I actually think that low turnout, that low engagement level is one of the things that allows this government to dig in and go, well, we're going to change everything and it ain't going to be better. There's going to be less democracy. There's going to be less representation for people. Fuck you. You're going to do things our way. But because there is such low engagement during elections, that you end up with some really horrible decisions being made by central government that they can justify. And we saw in the last couple of local body elections, specifically AstroTurf groups coming in and whipping up people and getting people all aggravated and going, I'm going to say racist things to get what they want. And that's so shitty. And so seeing these changes and the rate of change is definitely a shock to the system. But also knowing that what they're doing is they're silencing local voices, that's a real concern. And knowing that that's kind of been enabled because people didn't vote, because people didn't get out there and have their say. Both of the local government elections last year, where the turnout is traditionally awful, but also at the last general elections where there were 1 million people who didn't vote. Yeah, it's a tough one. And then on top of that, I'm always sitting here with this kind of thing going, well, how can this be fixed? Because local government reform isn't really a policy area that we hear a lot about during election campaigns with the general election. So I don't know what the plans are from any of the opposition parties around local governance, because I think if they just going, no, we're going to roll everything back to the way it was, that's part of the problem. The way it was clearly causing these gaps which allowed people to manipulate the problem. So we need reform continually. But I don't know that they're going to be looking at that old report, for example, that Simeon called woke, or if they're looking at something else. Yeah, it's a tough one. Our whole system, I think, needs to be reformed in so many ways, and this government has really highlighted that by manipulating it for the worst possible outcomes that support their supporters. And I think there's so many areas like local government, like broadcasting reform, for example, that we could do so much better and if we had plans, but there's also people at home who are having trouble putting food on the table or paying their bills, and that's clearly a much more important thing than, what's the reform from local government going to look like? It's tough. It's a really strange one. So yeah, hopefully you remember that any time you vote is really important. Any kind of representation is really important. We need to be able to hold on to that, because that's how we make sure decisions are done locally. Yeah. Anyway, that's the end of my extra add-on rant, I guess. Feel free to like, share, subscribe, comment, do whatever it is that you do. Hit that follow button on whatever platform it is that you're listening to this on, so that you can get updates. And yeah, I will catch you all next time.